So here we have some simple financials. There's nothing wrong with these financials. We can just make them more consumable by formatting. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come up here to A1. We're going to drag across our entire sheet, and we're going to do a merge and center. So we're hit home, merge and center. And now that we've got that title in the center, we can change the font size. So we'll make it a little bit larger so that it's readable. And we've got a nice title bar up here. Now, we discussed that when you merge and center, it's only going to keep the data that's in the upper left-hand box. And here we have two lines. We're moving very quickly. We grabbed both of them. When we hit merge and center, we get an error. Merging cells only keeps the upper left value and discards the other values. So if we were to hit OK on this, it's removed the date range and only left profit and loss. So we're going to Control Z, and we're going to do this the right way. We're going to select just the one, and we're going to hit merge and center. If we were to select the entire row and hit merge and center, then it's going to move this way out into no man's land. So we hit Control Z, and again, we want to select from the beginning of the data to the end of the data and hit merge and center. So what we've got here is we've got a merge and center here. We need to make sure that we have a merge and center here. And then the final. So we've gone from A to N on all of these, and they're all lining up properly. And this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and make this date range bold. The next thing that we see here is we have a row of headers, and then we have a total column. So on our headers, the first thing I want to do is differentiate. I'm going to make these light blue, or I'm going to fill it with light blue. Okay. And then I'm going to give it some borders. So I'm going to go ahead and give me all borders. And what we want to end up with here is these being light blue with the borders. And my total, what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to give it the borders, but I'm going to make it a dark blue. And I'm going to make that font white, and I'll make it bold. And what I've done here is I've made this stand out from my headers. So they look different so that people know that this is the total column. The next thing that we notice in these financials is we have headers and we have calculations. So I want to choose a way to show people that this is a header. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to select it. And I'm going to fill this with a light gray. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a border. And I'm going to make the items in it bold. So this lets everybody know that this is a header. Now, the border that I selected here is putting separations in all the cells. I don't necessarily like that, so I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to tell it to do outside borders. And you'll note nothing changed. What you have to do to get rid of those borders is you're going to have to come into this, right? And you're going to have to tell it no border, which is going to remove any of the borders. And then you're going to have to tell it outside borders. Now, you didn't have to remove or come out of that data to do that. You could have done that very easily staying inside of it. Another thing that people like to do in these instances, right, is I come down here, this is another header row, and I just click on the row. And I'm going to click on borders, and I'm going to click on my color, and it appears that it works. The problem is it's going outside of my data forever and ever. And if you try to print that, it turns into a real mess. So what we want to do in cases like this is I'm just going to take this entire row, I'm going to highlight it, I'm going to click on my format painter, and I'm going to click on cost of goods sold. Now I also have expenses down here, so I'm going to click on my format painter again, and I'm going to come right across my expenses and do the same thing this time. And I've got the same thing. So now I've got all my headers identified. I have what I call calculation columns here. So in my calculation columns, I want those to look different as well. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to paint them. And I'm going to use this light green color here. I'm going to give it a different type of border. So I'm going to use a top and double bottom border, which is going to give me this representation. Okay. And again, I know that I have several of these. This time I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to leave this alone. I'm not going to bold it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this entire thing, I'm going to select it. I'm going to do my format painter, and I'm going to come down here to my total cost of goods sold and my total expenses. So I'm going to click on this, select this again, format painter, my total expenses. And now I have some fairly good separation of my data. Now on this particular one, I have my gross profit here. This is a different type of calculation entirely. I have my net income, which is down here. We still have to work those out. So on my gross profit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to paint it a completely different color. I'm going to make it a yellow. And on my net income, I'm going to take it and I'm also going to make it a yellow. Now that's really, really bright. So I really want to rethink that and figure out what I want to do there. And I can come over here to these really quick styles and try to figure it out. Well, let's look at this accent here. That's kind of nice. I kind of like that one because we're actually getting a total. Or I can come up here to this total and I can use it. So I can use any of these that I want. In this particular case, because it's a total, I'm going to use this 60%, which is a darker green. And I'm going to make sure that I'm still using my same font. And I'm using Verdana on this. And I'm using size 10. So this is going to make them align. And I've picked that. And then I'm going to come down here to my net income, which is my totals of totals. Right? And on this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this right here. And again, I want to make sure that I've got my font set properly. And I'm going to change this to 10. Okay, so what we've got now is good separation. I want to further separate my total box. So what I'm going to do in my total box is I'm going to give it some borders. So I'm going to do outside borders. And that's going to give it a border on the outside all the way around. And I'm going to do the same thing over here in my categories, which is going to give me lines on both ends and separate all my data. Next, I want to take all my numeric values and I actually want to make them into the right data type. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to my format cells and I'm going to use accounting here. And I'm not going to put the decimals in. Now, as a CPA or as an accountant, you likely need to be able to foot this data. You'll likely need that precision. As an end user, I don't need that. It's just confusing. So what I'm going to do is take that out. So we have an end user view and we end up with the proper formatting. Your negative numbers, of course, are in parentheses and various things like that. To clean it up a little bit more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of my columns here and I'm just going to resize them to actually fit the numbers the way that they need to fit. So this should give me some good spacing. I'm going to give myself a little bit more so I have some white space in those cells so it looks pretty. And I get a very nice representation of what the financials look like. Now I'm going to take this into a page layout, which should give me an idea of what it's going to look like printed. And in this particular case, if we look at my page layout settings, my orientation is landscape. I've already set my size to 11 by 17 and my margins. So I've got a fairly good looking printable financial statement that has good separations and also has all of these things. Now I do see that I have a problem here. Let's try to clean this up, make this a little wider, and that's going to make that fall out the way that it should. And at this point, it looks good to print. I have the header. It's all fitting on one page. It's ready to rock and roll. And again, my totals are clearly defined. My monthlies are clearly defined. And I've got something that I can work with. I guess the only thing I might want to do to make this a little better is I'll come down here and I will add a bottom border. And that's going to clean up the bottom. So from there, you went from just a set of numbers to something that's actually presentable to a client. Granted, you might want to use a different theme, or you might want to use different colors, or lay it out in a way that makes sense to you. This just happens to make sense to me. If you don't like the colors, you can always come in here and you can start looking at different themes, and you can adjust these things out and make it look pretty much any way that you want it to look. So there's a different representation of the data. Maybe you prefer those colors a little bit more.